Against the unforgiving backdrop of Montana's bitterest winter in history, Dr. James Harrison had exactly 7 minutes to decide whether to amputate a trapped bear's leg or watch both the mother and her unborn cubs perish in the merciless cold. His hands, steady through 3 decades of veterinary surgeries, trembled as he assessed the mangled limb caught in the illegal trap. The pregnant black bear's eyes, usually fierce with wild dignity, met his with an almost human plea for help. Time was slipping away like the heat from their bodies in the -30 degrees darkness. The choice before him would either end his career or make wildlife medical history. 30 years of experience screamed at him that this was impossible. A wild, pregnant bear, alone in human contact during her most vulnerable moment. Yet here she was, her labor breathing, creating small clouds in the frigid air, her trust defying every natural instinct. The trap's rusty teeth had bitten deep, and blood stained the pristine snow beneath her. Even in the beam of his headlamp, he could see she was severely malnourished, her frame gaunt despite her swollen belly. She should have been in hibernation months ago. James fought back the memories threatening to overwhelm him, Sarah's voice echoing from 5 years ago. Your gift isn't just healing animals, James, it's seeing their souls. His late wife had always understood his connection to wildlife better than anyone. Now, kneeling in the snow beside this magnificent creature, her words had never felt more true. The decision crystallized in his mind. Okay, girl, he whispered, reaching for his medical kit. Let's make history together. Life hadn't always been solitary for James. At 55, he had traded a successful veterinary practice in Seattle for this remote cabin in Montana's wilderness. The transition from saving pampered pets to rehabilitating injured wildlife had been part of his original plan, but after losing Sarah to cancer, the city's constant buzz had become unbearable. Each siren, each crowd, each sympathetic glance from former clients had felt like reopening a wound that refused to heal. His cabin, crafted from local pine and riverstone, stood as a solitary outpost of humanity among the snow-laden mountains. Solar panels and a wind turbine provided modest electricity, while a wood stove kept the bitter cold at bay. It wasn't luxurious, but it suited him perfectly. Every morning, he'd wake before dawn, kindle the fire, and watch the sun paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold. The nearest town was 50 miles away, a journey he made monthly for supplies and a check-in with the local ranger station. His medical skills hadn't gone unused in his new life. He had become known among the local rangers as someone who could help with injured wildlife. His cabin's basement had been converted into a small medical station, complete with basic veterinary supplies and equipment he'd brought from his practice. Over the past 3 years, he had treated everything from injured eagles to orphaned deer fawns, but bears held a special place in his heart. During his practice years, James had specialized in large predators, spending considerable time studying bear behavior and social structures. He had written several papers on bear rehabilitation and had even helped establish protocols for treating injured bears in the wild. That particular winter had started earlier and harder than usual. By mid-November, temperatures had plunged well below freezing, and the snow had piled up to unprecedented levels. James noticed changes in wildlife behavior, deer moving to lower elevations, birds struggling to find food, and predators growing bolder in their hunt for sustenance. His satellite phone brought regular updates from the ranger station about wildlife struggling with the harsh conditions. The day he found the bear had started routinely enough. He'd been checking his weather station readings when he heard it, a sound that made his experienced ears perk up. Not the typical grunt or huff of a bear, but a sound of distress that spoke to his decades of experience. The temperature reading of -30 degrees made his decision to investigate even more crucial. Now, as he worked to stabilize the injured bear, James knew he was witnessing something unprecedented. Her trust in him defied every natural instinct, every documented behavior pattern. As he administered the local anesthetic to work on her leg, her eyes remained fixed on him, filled with what he could only describe as understanding. "You're something special, aren't you?" he murmured, carefully cleaning the wound. The bear's only response was to shift slightly, adjusting her position to give him better access to her injured limb. This wasn't just about saving an injured animal anymore. This was about witnessing a moment that could change everything we thought we knew about human-wildlife interaction. Little did James know, but his decision to help this bear would lead to one of the most extraordinary experiences of his life, testing not only his medical skills but also his understanding of the deep connection possible between humans and wild animals. As he worked against time and temperature, the beginning of an incredible journey was unfolding in the heart of Montana's wilderness, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about healing, trust, and the mysterious bonds that can form between species. Through the howling wind and swirling snow, James made the grueling journeying back to his cabin. The injured bear, now unconscious from a carefully measured dose of sedative, her massive form weakened by starvation, still weighed close to 300 pounds. Every step was a battle against exhaustion and the merciless cold. Sweat froze on his face despite the bitter temperature, his muscles screaming in protest. "Almost there, girl," he panted, though she couldn't hear him. The words materialized as white puffs in the frigid air. His years of experience told him the next few hours would be critical. The combination of blood loss, pregnancy, and hypothermia created a precarious situation that would challenge every bit of his medical expertise. Finally, after what seemed like hours but couldn't have been more than 40 minutes, the warm glow of his cabin windows pierced through the darkness. Inside, James quickly transformed his living room into an emergency medical station. The basement facility wouldn't do. The bear needed the warmth of the main floor, and he needed easy access to monitor her condition as he worked to stabilize her. Memories of his last conversation with Sarah flooded back. "Animals know, James," she had said during one of their final walks in the hospital garden. "They know who sees them as beings worthy of respect, rather than just creatures to be fixed." Now, as he carefully cleaned and assessed the bear's mangled leg, those words felt prophetic. The damage was extensive. The illegal trap had severed several tendons and crushed part of the bone. Under normal circumstances, such an injury would make survival in the wild impossible. But these weren't normal circumstances. This bear was carrying cubs, and her strange trust in him suggested something extraordinary was possible. Hours passed as James meticulously repaired what he could: delicate surgery to reconnect tendons, careful cleaning and disinfection of the wounds, and finally, a complex splint that would allow for some movement while protecting the healing tissues. Throughout it all, he monitored her vital signs and the condition of her unborn cubs using portable ultrasound equipment. Dawn was breaking when he finally finished the initial treatment. The bear, whom he had started thinking of as Bella after his grandmother Isabella, who had the same gentle eyes, began showing signs of waking. This was a moment of truth. How would she react to finding herself inside a human dwelling? To his amazement, Bella's awakening was almost serene. Her eyes opened slowly, taking in her surroundings with remarkable calmness. When her gaze met his, there was recognition rather than fear. She made no attempt to move, seeming to understand her injured state required stillness. "You're safe here," James spoke softly, maintaining a respectful distance while preparing a mixture of nutrients and electrolytes she desperately needed. "Let's get some fluids into you, then we can think about food." The next few days established a routine that defied everything James knew about wild bear behavior. Bella accepted his medical care with extraordinary patience, allowing him to change bandages, clean wounds, and even perform ultrasound checks on her cubs. The scans revealed 3 distinct heartbeats. She was carrying triplets. James documented everything meticulously, knowing this case could revolutionize wildlife rehabilitation practices. He contacted Dr. Michael Chin, his former colleague from Seattle who specialized in bear behavior. "This goes against everything we know about pregnant bears," James said during one of their satellite phone calls. "She should be hibernating, not accepting human care." "Are you sure she wasn't previously habituated to humans?" "No tags, no signs of previous human contact," James replied, watching Bella near the wood stove. "She's completely wild, Mike. She's just different." The real challenge came in keeping her nourished. Pregnant bears typically enter hibernation with significant fat reserves to sustain them through winter and birth. Bella had been severely malnourished when James found her, likely due to the injury preventing proper foraging before winter. He developed a careful feeding program, starting with easily digestible, protein-rich broths before gradually introducing solid foods. Bella's trust deepened with each passing day. She began responding to her name, turning her head when James spoke to her. More surprisingly, she started showing signs of wanting to communicate, different vocalizations for different needs, specific movements to indicate pain or discomfort. It was as if she understood that her survival and that of her cubs depended on this unprecedented partnership with a human. One evening, as James sat at his desk updating his medical journals, Bella did something that brought tears to his eyes. She slowly dragged herself across the floor, her healing leg carefully protected, and laid her head on his knee. The gesture was so gentle, so deliberate, it transcended the natural barriers between wild and tame. "You're still wild," he reminded her softly, carefully placing a hand on her massive head. "Don't let this temporary arrangement fool you." But even as he said it, James knew something extraordinary was happening here. This wasn't just about physical healing anymore, it was about trust, about bridging an ancient gap between humans and one of nature's most powerful predators. The wind howled outside, and snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin, an impossible partnership was flourishing. As James watched Bella drift off to sleep by the fire, her injured leg healing steadily, he couldn't help but wonder what the coming weeks would bring. The cubs would arrive soon, and with them, new challenges that would test this remarkable bond between man and bear. As winter's grip tightened over Montana's wilderness, the bond between James and Bella evolved into something that challenged every established principle of wildlife behavior. Through the cabin's frosted windows, the outside world had transformed into an endless sea of white, but inside, an extraordinary partnership flourished. In the warmth of the wood stove's glow, James had transformed his living room into a careful balance of medical facility and natural den space. Bella had claimed a corner near the stove, arranging blankets and straw to her satisfaction with meticulous care. Her injured leg was healing remarkably well, though she still favored it when moving around the cabin. The trust she showed went beyond mere acceptance of his presence. She actively sought his company, especially during the ultrasound examinations of her cubs. "Let's check on your little ones," James would say each morning, and Bella would shift position obligingly, allowing him to press the ultrasound wand against her swollen belly. The three cubs were developing well, their tiny hearts beating strong and steady on the monitor's screen. But it was Bella's reactions that fascinated him most. She would watch the screen intently, as if understanding she was seeing her unborn cubs. Dr. Chin had begun making regular visits to the cabin, braving the treacherous winter roads to document this unprecedented situation. "In 30 years of studying bears, I've never seen anything like this," he admitted, watching Bella accept James's examination of her healing leg. "She's maintaining all her wild instincts. You can see it in how she arranges her den space, how she responds to outside sounds, but she's integrated you into her safety zone. It's revolutionary." The news of Bella's situation had spread to the wildlife research community, drawing both fascination and concern. Some experts argued that such close human contact would make it impossible for her to return to the wild successfully. Others saw it as a unique opportunity to study bear intelligence and adaptability. "You understand the risks here, don't you?" Michael asked during one of his visits, his voice low, though Bella was dozing across the room. "When those cubs come, her maternal instincts will be at their peak. Even with this extraordinary trust she's showing, she'll be dangerous." James nodded. Watching Bella's steady breathing, "I know, but there's something different about her, Mike. She's not just tolerating human presence, she's actively choosing to trust it." As if to prove his point, Bella had begun displaying remarkable behaviors that seemed designed to communicate with James. She developed distinct vocalizations for different needs, a soft grunt when she wanted water, a different tone when her leg was causing discomfort. More impressively, she started showing signs of understanding human patterns, recognizing the routine of medical treatments, and even seeming to anticipate them. One stormy evening, James was awakened by Bella's urgent grunting. He found her agitated, pawing at her healing leg. The splint had shifted in her sleep, causing discomfort. Rather than reacting with panic or aggression, she remained perfectly still as he adjusted it, her intelligent eyes following his movements with what could only be described as patience. "You're rewriting everything we thought we knew about bear behavior," he told her softly, checking the bandages every single day. The real breakthrough came during a particularly brutal storm that knocked out power to the cabin. The temperature inside began to drop rapidly, and James struggled to maintain enough heat with just the wood stove. Bella, sensing his distress, began dragging branches and logs from the pile he'd stacked by her den space, bringing them to him one by one. "Are you helping me keep us warm?" he asked incredulously, watching her methodically move the wood. It was behavior that showed not just intelligence but a level of interspecies cooperation that defied explanation. Dr. Chin's documentation of these events began drawing attention from major wildlife research institutions. Requests for studies and observations poured in, but James remained protective of Bella's space, allowing only essential medical visits. "She's not a research subject," he insisted. "She's a patient who's chosen to trust us." As her pregnancy progressed, Bella's behavior became increasingly focused on preparation. She spent hours arranging and rearranging her den space, a natural nesting behavior that James recognized from his studies. But there was an added dimension to her preparations. She would often pause in her work to look at him, as if seeking approval or trying to communicate something about her plans. "You're going to be an amazing mother," he told her during one of these moments, and her response was to press her massive head gently against his leg, a gesture of trust that still amazed him every time she did it. The pregnancy was entering its final stages, and James knew the greatest test of this extraordinary bond lay ahead. The birth of the cubs would be a critical moment, one that would challenge everything they had built together. Natural instinct would demand that Bella protect her cubs from any perceived threat, including humans. Yet somehow, James sensed that even this fundamental aspect of bear behavior might prove different with her. Late one night, as snow fell silently outside, James sat in his usual chair updating his journals. Bella lay nearby, her breathing deep and steady. Looking at her, he thought about Sarah and wished she could see this. She had always believed in the depth of connection possible between humans and animals, always insisting that there was more to these magnificent creatures than science had yet discovered. "You're proving her right, girl," he whispered to Bella. "Every day, you're proving her right." The bear lifted her head at the sound of his voice, her eyes meeting his with that inexplicable understanding that had become familiar yet never ceased to amaze him. In that moment, James knew they were on the verge of something even more extraordinary. The birth of the cubs wouldn't be just a medical event, it would be a test of trust, a bridge between wild and human worlds, and possibly the beginning of a new understanding of what was possible between species. The birth of Bella's cubs began on a night when the moon hung full and bright over the snow-covered Montana wilderness. James had noticed her increasing restlessness throughout the day, the way she paced between her den area and his position, her soft whines carrying notes of anticipation rather than distress. His years of experience told him the time had come. "Easy now, girl," he murmured, preparing his medical equipment while maintaining a respectful distance. "Everything's ready when you are." The trust they had built over the past weeks would face its ultimate test. A wild bear giving birth in the presence of a human was unprecedented. Every natural instinct should have driven her to seek isolation. The first contractions began just after midnight. Bella's behavior was extraordinary. Instead of retreating fully into her den space, she kept James within sight, occasionally seeking reassurance through gentle eye contact. Her trust in him remained absolute, even in this most vulnerable moment. The first cub arrived at 2:43 a.m., a tiny, dark bundle that seemed impossibly small compared to its mother. Bella immediately began cleaning her newborn with gentle, practiced movements. James watched in amazement as she expertly handled each aspect of post-birth care, yet still allowed him close enough to monitor the cub's vital signs. "That's it, beautiful job," he encouraged softly, documenting everything with trembling hands. The cub, a male, let out a healthy squeal as Bella stimulated its breathing. The sound seemed to fill the cabin with new life. The second cub followed 40 minutes later, another male, slightly larger than his brother. Bella's instincts were perfect, each movement demonstrating the ancient wisdom of her species, while accepting James's presence as part of her support. She even shifted position slightly when she sensed him trying to get a better view of the second cub's arrival. The third cub's birth, however, proved more challenging. James could see Bella's exhaustion as she struggled with this final delivery. The cub was positioned awkwardly, and her contractions seemed to be weakening. After 20 minutes of watching her struggle, James knew he needed to intervene. "I need to help with this one, girl," he said softly, moving closer with medical gloves on. In what would later be described as a watershed moment in wildlife medicine, Bella remained calm as James assisted with the birth of her third cub. The tiny female finally emerged at 4:17 a.m., significantly smaller than her brothers. But nature had one more surprise in store. As James was recording the details of the 3 births, Bella's behavior indicated another contraction. "That's impossible," he whispered, quickly checking his ultrasound records. "We only saw 3 in every scan." Yet there it was, at 4:52 a.m., a 4th cub emerged into the world. This tiny female, even smaller than her sister, had somehow hidden behind her siblings during every ultrasound examination. Her size was concerning, but her fierce cries spoke of a fighting spirit. "Well, little one," James said, watching Bella clean her surprise 4th cub. "You're definitely determined to prove us all wrong." The tiny cub, whom he would later name Spirit for her remarkable will to live, would need special care to survive. Her siblings, already nursing successfully, were nearly twice her size. What happened next defied everything James knew about bear behavior. As Spirit struggled to reach milk, continuously pushed aside by her larger siblings, Bella did something remarkable. She began gently nudging the tiny cub toward James, her eyes conveying a clear message: help her. Drawing on his years of experience, James prepared a special formula he developed for orphan bear cubs. To his amazement, Bella watched intently as he fed Spirit, showing no signs of aggression or anxiety. Instead, she seemed to understand that her smallest cub needed this human intervention to survive. "You really are something special," James told Bella as she helped position Spirit for her next feeding. The bond between them had transcended traditional boundaries, creating a partnership that would reshape our understanding of wildlife rehabilitation. As dawn painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, the cabin held a scene that would have seemed impossible just months ago: 4 healthy bear cubs, a content mother, and a human caregiver working in harmony. The larger cubs, already showing distinct personalities, nursed contentedly, while Spirit, with James's help, fought for her place in the family. Dr. Chin arrived later that morning, having received James's satellite phone message about the births. His reaction to the scene spoke volumes: first disbelief, then wonder, as he witnessed Bella's continued acceptance of human presence around her newborns. "This changes everything we thought we knew about bear behavior," Michael said, watching James tend to Spirit while Bella calmly nursed her other cubs. "She's not just tolerating human presence. She's actively seeking your help with her run. It's revolutionary." The days following the births established a new routine in the cabin. James maintained careful records of each cub's development, paying special attention to Spirit's progress. The tiny cub required feeding every 2 hours, and Bella seemed to understand the schedule, often waking James with gentle grunts when Spirit needed attention. The other cubs thrived as well. The larger males, whom James privately named Thunder and Storm for their boisterous personalities, grew quickly. Their sister, slightly smaller but fiercely independent, showed remarkable agility even in her first days. James called her Aurora after the northern lights that danced above the cabin on the night of her birth. As James watched the family bond and grow, he realized he was witnessing something that went beyond scientific observation. This was a story of trust, of bridges built between species, and of the extraordinary capacity for understanding that existed in the natural world. "Your mother's teaching us all something incredible," he told Spirit during one of their late-night feedings. The tiny cub clutched his finger with surprising strength. Bella, watching from her den, rumbled softly in what seemed like agreement. Outside, the Montana winter continued its fierce reign, but inside the cabin, an unprecedented family partnership flourished, rewriting everything we thought we knew about the boundaries between wild and human worlds. The transformation of James's cabin into a bear nursery brought new challenges and revelations with each passing day. As winter slowly released its grip on the Montana wilderness, the four cubs grew rapidly, each developing distinct personalities that kept both their mother and James constantly alert. Thunder and Storm, the robust males, were the first to explore beyond the den space, their curiosity leading them into mischief around the cabin. Aurora, their more cautious sister, watched and learned from their misadventures before attempting anything herself. And Spirit, though still the smallest, made up for her size with determination that sometimes left James breathless. "You've got your mother's spirit," he'd tell her during their supplementary feeding sessions, which were becoming less frequent as she grew stronger. Bella would watch these interactions with what James could only describe as maternal pride, her eyes showing that remarkable intelligence that had first drawn him to her. Dr. Chin's weekly visits became opportunities to document an unprecedented approach to wildlife rehabilitation. The cubs were developing all their natural instincts, learning to forage, developing hunting skills, and establishing their hierarchy while simultaneously accepting human presence as part of their world. "Look at this," Michael remarked one morning, watching Bella demonstrate proper fishing technique to her cubs using the large water bowl James had provided. "She's teaching them every survival skill they'll need, but she's adapted it to include human elements. It's like she's preparing them for a world where humans aren't automatically threats." The most remarkable developments came during Bella's teaching sessions. She would take her cubs on short expeditions around the cabin's immediate vicinity, showing them how to identify edible plants, teaching them to climb trees, and demonstrating basic hunting moves. But what fascinated researchers most was how she would always bring them back to the cabin, as if ensuring they understood it was part of their territory. Spirit's progress became a source of particular pride for both James and Bella. Though still smaller than her siblings, she showed remarkable problem-solving abilities. When she couldn't compete with her larger brothers for food, she developed her own techniques, often using her size to her advantage and managing to reach places they couldn't. "She's going to survive out there," James told Michael during one of his visits, watching Spirit successfully retrieve a piece of fruit hidden as an enrichment exercise. "She's learning to use every disadvantage as an advantage." The preparation for their eventual return to the wild became more focused as spring approached. James and Dr. Chin developed a careful protocol that would gradually increase the bears' independence, while maintaining the trust that had been established. They created a series of natural challenges around the cabin, fallen logs for climbing practice, hidden food caches to develop foraging skills, and even a small artificial stream for fishing lessons. Bella took to these arrangements with remarkable understanding, using each new addition to teach her cubs vital survival skills. She would demonstrate a technique, then watch patiently as each cub attempted to master it. Her patience with Spirit during these lessons was particularly touching. She would repeatedly demonstrate movements until her smallest cub could accomplish them, often adapting the techniques to account for Spirit's size. One morning, James witnessed a scene that brought tears to his eyes. Spirit was struggling to climb a particularly challenging tree, her siblings already perched in the higher branches. Instead of giving up, she studied the trunk carefully, then used a different route that, while longer, played to her strengths. When she finally reached her siblings, Bella turned to James with a look that seemed to say, "See? She'll be fine." The cubs' growth also brought bittersweet realizations. Each new skill they mastered, each bit of independence they gained, brought them closer to the day when they would need to return to the wild. James found himself struggling with this inevitability, even as he knew it was the only right outcome. They need to be wild, he reminded himself daily, watching them practice their survival skills. That's always been the goal. But the bond that had formed between them all made the prospect of separation increasingly difficult. The turning point came on a warm spring morning when James heard distant bear calls from the forest. Bella's reaction was immediate. She stood alert, listening intently. The cubs gathered around her, their behavior showing they recognized these calls as significant. For a moment, James's heart stopped, fearing this might be the moment of departure, but Bella did something extraordinary. She led her cubs to the cabin's porch, positioned them where they could hear the distant bears, then turned to James with that same intelligent gaze he'd come to know so well. The message was clear. They needed to understand there were other bears out there, but they weren't ready yet. "You're teaching them about their future," he realized aloud. "But you're doing it your way." As spring progressed, the bears began taking longer excursions into the surrounding forest. They would leave in the morning, Bella leading her cubs with confident purpose, and return by sunset. Each trip built their strength and survival skills while maintaining the extraordinary bridge of trust that had been established. Spirit, though still requiring occasional supplementary feeding, kept pace with her siblings. Her determination had transformed her into a capable young bear, her small size offset by her remarkable intelligence and adaptability. She had become living proof that, with the right support, even the most challenging odds could be overcome. One evening, as James watched the family return from their daily expedition, he noticed a change in Bella's demeanor. She stood at the forest edge, watching her cubs demonstrate their newly learned skills with what seemed like assessment in her gaze. "They're almost ready, aren't they?" he asked softly. Bella's response was to approach him slowly, pressing her head against his hand in that familiar gesture of trust. In her eyes, he saw not just intelligence but also gratitude, a deep understanding of what they had accomplished together. The time for their return to the wild was approaching, but the legacy of their extraordinary partnership would live on through these cubs who had learned to navigate both the natural world and the delicate boundary between wild and human spaces. The day Bella chose to lead her family into the wilderness dawned clear and bright, the kind of spring morning that whispered of new beginnings. James had sensed the change coming, had seen it in Bella's increasingly focused behavior, in the cubs' growing independence, and in the way they all responded to the awakening force around them. Still, when the moment arrived, it carried both the weight of inevitability and the sharp sting of farewell. The family had returned from their morning excursion, but instead of settling into their usual routine, Bella began gathering her cubs at the forest edge. Each of them, even little Spirit, stood alert and ready, their wild instincts clearly awakened. James watched from the porch, his heart simultaneously full and breaking, as Bella approached him one final time. "You're ready, aren't you?" he whispered, as she pressed her massive head against his hand, their gesture of trust that had become so familiar over these extraordinary months. In her eyes, he saw not just intelligence but also gratitude, a deep understanding of what they had accomplished together. Thunder and Storm, now robust young bears, waited impatiently at the tree line, occasionally testing their strength against each other. Aurora, ever observant, kept watch over her brothers while maintaining her characteristic poise. And Spirit, the tiny cub who had needed so much extra care, stood confidently with her siblings. Her small size belied the fierce determination that had become her trademark. The moment of departure held no drama, no fanfare, just the quiet dignity of wild creatures returning to their natural world. Bella turned from James and rejoined her cubs, pausing once to look back at the cabin that had sheltered them through their most vulnerable time. Then, with deliberate purpose, she led her family into the forest, their forms gradually disappearing among the trees like shadows melting into dawn. James stood watching long after they had vanished from sight, the morning air carrying the sounds of the awakening wilderness. The story might have ended there, a beautiful tale of rescue, rehabilitation, and release. But nature had one more extraordinary chapter to write. A month after Bella's departure, James was awakened before dawn by familiar sounds outside his cabin. Looking through his window, he saw a sight that took his breath away. Bella stood at the edge of the clearing, but she wasn't alone. Behind her, playing with the confidence of young bears who knew they were protected, were all 4 cubs. They had grown noticeably in the months since their departure, their movements showing the sure-footedness that came from life in the wild. More remarkably, accompanying them was a large male bear, one James recognized as one of the dominant males in the region. Instead of showing aggression, the male seemed to have accepted Bella's cubs as his own, demonstrating a level of social adaptation that challenged everything known about bear behavior. Over the following months, these visits became regular occurrences. The family would appear at dawn or dusk, never approaching too closely but maintaining a clear connection to the cabin and its human inhabitant. They were wild bears now, but they had created something unprecedented, a bridge between their world and his. Spirit, the tiny fighter who had needed so much extra care, had grown into a remarkable young bear. Though still smaller than her siblings, she moved with a grace and intelligence that set her apart. During their visits, James often noticed her watching him with the same thoughtful gaze as her mother, suggesting that the extraordinary capacity for trust had passed to the next generation. Word of this unprecedented development spread through the wildlife research community. Dr. Chun helped James document everything, leading to groundbreaking papers that would reshape approaches to wildlife rehabilitation. The Bella Protocol, as it became known, demonstrated that successful rehabilitation wasn't just about physical healing. It was about building trust while preserving essential wildness. 1 year to the day after finding Bella in that illegal trap, James received a special visit. The family appeared at dawn, but this time there was something different. Spirit approached closer than usual, and behind her came 2 tiny cubs of her own. She stood at the clearing's edge, her cubs watching curiously as she demonstrated the same trust her mother had shown, creating a legacy that would continue through generations. The experience transformed James's understanding of wildlife rehabilitation. He had learned that successful conservation wasn't just about saving animals. It was about building bridges of understanding between worlds. The local rangers reported that Bella's extended family group showed unusually low conflict with human settlements, maintaining a respectful distance while seeming to understand the boundaries between their worlds. The illegal trap that had nearly ended Bella's life still hung on James's wall, but now it was surrounded by photographs documenting their extraordinary journey. They served as powerful testimony to what could happen when humans chose to help rather than harm, when trust was given the chance to overcome natural barriers. On quiet evenings, James would often sit on his porch, listening to the sounds of the forest. Sometimes, he would catch glimpses of bears at the tree line, perhaps Bella's descendants, carrying forward that remarkable legacy of trust and wild wisdom. The cabin had become something of an informal education center, with James sharing their story to inspire a new generation's interest in wildlife conservation. Every act of kindness matters, he would tell visiting students, showing them the photographs of Bella and her cubs. Sometimes, when we offer help with respect and understanding, nature responds in ways we never imagined possible. Sarah had been right all those years ago. Animals didn't know who saw them as beings worthy of respect. Bella had proven that trust, once given and honored, could bridge even the widest gaps between species. Her legacy lived on, not just through her cubs, but through every animal that would be helped by the new understanding she had helped create. As James watched the sunset behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the clearing where his extraordinary journey with Bella had begun, he reflected on how one moment of compassion could ripple through time, changing not just lives, but entire approaches to wildlife conservation. Somewhere in the gathering dusk, a bear called out, a sound not of challenge, but of connection, echoing across the divide between wild and human worlds that Bella had helped to bridge.